There's a quote that said, fear stands for false evidences appearing real. And when you think about that, how many times have you feared something and you're like, but in reality, when you actually did it, it was one of those things that you just simply made up. Hey, welcome to a rare leader conversation with myself, Tony Jalen,
Danielle Jalen.
and today we're gonna talk about fears that hold you back. I think when we look at our life, there's a lot of times which I was afraid to make that leap. And of course, a lot of times through the encouragement of Danielle, I was willing to make that leap, but it was sometimes scary to make it. And so today we're going to talk about fears that hold you back from sometimes even finishing what you start. So if you're on Twitter, hi, Twitter world. We're not on Threads, the anti-Twitter, YouTube, or the Rare Leaders Facebook group. So here's my question for you: do you ever find yourself starting a project you have every intention of finishing, and then you simply don't finish it? You get it to the idea mode, but when it comes to taking action, you just don't take it. I think sometimes there's a lot of different factors that can contribute to you not even starting, and a lot of it could be attached to fear. So I think the first one is the fear of failure. I remember when I got into this role, that in terms of my professional career that I was first in, I was like, man, start a new career, something I don't have any idea about. Well, what if we fail? And I remember Danielle said to me, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can go back to advertising. Like, I guess that's true. Um, how often you think the fear of failure has been a common fear that you've had to deal with, Danielle?
I think a lot of it, like when you look at, like, am I going to fail at this? Like, we just don't like to not be successful. We don't like the feeling of not living up to maybe the hype that we've put out there that, how great it's going to be, or letting other people down in that process. And so, like, we just use that feeling of not wanting to feel a certain way to not do something. And I think that is a big part of like the fear of failure.
Yeah. I think too, like when you think about the fear of failure, it makes you procrastinate sometimes too, because all of a sudden you start digging into it and diving into it. You peel back the layers, and you're like, "Holy crap!" Like there's gonna be a price that's gonna be paid to get this done. Um, so I think you got to ask yourself, okay, why am I procrastinating? At least for me, it took me 30 days to quit my old job to get into Heartland, where I've been at for now for 17 years. And I was like walking around. I remember walking around the radio station going, oh man, I don't know, this and that. Um, I think that led me to realizing the fear of losing something. That's another fear that holds us back from finishing what we start. And although this fear isn't as common as a fear of failure, I think one of the reasons you may be putting something off is because your fear of losing something. Where have you seen this coming up for you?
Well, I think if you've had success, but yet all of a sudden, like, you're not seeing that success as much, like, and you're trying to start something new.
Mhm.
You don't want to lose all the progress that you've accomplished to this point,
Yeah,
as well as, you know now you have to start over, and you know that it's going to take a lot of work.
yeah.
Are you gonna, like, I think that tends to, like, be a factor in losing something. Like, you've done all this work to this point, like all this accomplishment. But yet, if you're unhappy with where you're at and you just live in that glory of what happened in the past, but it's not continuing right now, um, just to kind of wipe that slate clean.
I think you make a good point in terms of like my own personal experience. I was division sales manager for 12 years. That was a long time. Like that's a long time in that role. And I think one of the things that I was afraid of doing in terms of making that next step was the fear of losing everything that we built. and to remember that nothing lasts forever, and you've got to find something that's going to challenge you. Because if it doesn't challenge you, it's not going to grow you. And truth be told, I was not as challenged much in my old role, and I made this decision back in November, and it's like, like you said, oh, we're going to figure it out. And you always figure things out, but it does require a different level of thinking, because what got you here, if here, won't necessarily get you there, right? If you keep on doing the same thing, you'll still continue to get the same results, and I think it's also a diminishing results too after a while, don't you think? If you keep on doing the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah, because you're just doing to maintain, and really there's nothing maintaining. You're either going forward or you're going backwards. And I think a lot of times when we think that we're maintaining something and that everything's okay,
Right.
is where we really start to lose ground.
Right. And I think too, in terms of losing something, like I think for me, every time I quote unquote feel I lost something, I gained something from it. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I gained different perspectives. I learned different skill sets. And I've been able to use that to not only empower and equip myself to get to the next level, but to empower, equip, and encourage others to. There's a saying that your failure today could be someone's inspiration tomorrow, and I think about that often, right? That the failures you have today, what if you could use that to inspire someone else, and someone might say, "Ah, I don't want to go and fall on the sword for somebody else." I get it. I get it. I think another fear that holds us back from finishing what we start is the fear that others will judge you. Um, and it's right. It's a true fear, isn't it?
I think it's a made up fear in your head. Yeah, when you actually sit down and think about that, that's what everyone's processing through their minds, and nobody actually really cares what you're doing.
Right. And then the day, what you're saying, at the end of the day, life is going to go on for them, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's a true thing. Like the decisions that we make, others may not agree with. The decisions we make to go after our goals and dreams, people might think you're weird about it. Like you're crazy to do that. And judging is going to come with change. Because I think sometimes too, because you're changing, it also forces other people to change, which they may not like. I've seen this before where people want to start other businesses where they go and tell their boss, I'm looking to go do that business. They're like, well, it's not all what it's cut out to be. And then you talk to other people, and well, yeah, it is. It's actually better than what it is. But I think this is a reality that sometimes we just got to get over. Like you're a big deal, but you're not that big of a deal. And so what if they judge you? Because at the end of the day, you know, it's your life, and you get to live with the decisions that you make. And I think part of life, and it's one of I actually have ink on me. That's AKA a tattoo. Um, and one of the inscriptions I have on me is called "Only God will judge me." Only God can judge me. Because I had to go through a lot of periods of my life, and I still sometimes, you know, am challenged with this. That afraid of being judged, afraid of what people are going to say. And part of life is accepting that you're okay if people judge you and your actions. There's a thing that I was actually talking to our son about is, be true to you. Because if you can be true to you, you can be more truthful with others. You know who you are and what you're doing. So don't let other people's perceptions of you change your behavior. So I think that's, you know, three biggest fears I myself have gone through: fears that others would judge you, fear of losing something, and fear of failure. What other fears you feel has came up for you that you've had to go ahead and overcome to finish what you start?
Well, I think it's you like are if you're working towards a change, Like, what is on the other side of that change? And I think that that tends to be a fear, like, what once I get there, now what do I have to do to continue this? If I
Mm.
finish this, what am I gonna have to continue to do to move forward? Am I gonna like lose everything that I did? Um, and so I think sometimes it's just the unknown on the other side of hitting that. What is there?
Are you saying in terms of like, okay, I achieved that goal, but then what other price I'm gonna have to pay?
Right. What am I gonna have to like if I do this and I get that, like what am I gonna have to continue to do? Because everything takes work. And I think sometimes we have the fear of continuing that work um once we accomplish something.
And the higher you go in life, the harder it gets because there's less people doing it, I think. We think about our son in terms of college athletics, and I was watching a video last night from Charles Barkley. He was talking about choosing his college. I thought it was a good point. He's like, hey, you're looking to play at the next level because you like to play the game. So find somewhere where you can actually be playing right away. And I thought that was a good point. What do you think in terms of the fear of becoming who you think you can become?
So I think that's part of what I was referencing is like, what if I am becoming that? What if I do become that? What are the sacrifices that I'm going to have to continue to make? Because everything takes work. And I
Right.
think sometimes we fear the work and it's not actually as much work as we build it up to be to do it. It's just, are you willing to make the sacrifices and the discipline to be that?
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know what those sacrifices and work is going to be. Like if I would have known all the things I've had to do to get to where I'm at today, I don't know if I would have done it. I'd be like, you're freaking crazy. But then again, there's a reward on that, right? With risk, there is typically some reward. You play the lottery. The risk is you might win $0, which I actually did last week. Just I thought it'd be fun. Everyone around me was doing. I'm like, oh, what is it? They're like, you don't know what the lottery amount is? I go, I have no idea. They're like, really? It's like $1 billion. I'm like, that's it? And the guy laughed at me. Goes, that's it. I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, I get to go ahead and have a couple less energy drinks this week, and I bought some, and I got one number. Didn't win anything, but I mean, understand, yeah, there's a risk, in doing things. But also I think too is like you gotta think, okay, well, if I don't do this, what cost is gonna come with it? Right. I think for me, and I think I've been like this majority of my life, I can dream about all the good things that I want to do with my life. But what gets me going and inspired and motivated is the nightmare. That's what gets me going. I think about for our son that he's going to that next level for college. I'm like, well, it depends on what college he's going to go to. I'm like, he's watching this later. I know I told you, Ezekiel, you're going to pay for everything, but I understand we have to support you some regard, right? But I was just talking to someone just the other day about, some of the colleges he's looking at. He goes, well, the cost of living there is pretty high. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, he's going to probably need $2,000, $3,000 a month. I'm like, all right. So I'm like, all right, okay. So and it's interesting; those thoughts will keep in my mind, and I start like I woke up thinking about that this morning. I'm like, all right, okay. What would I be willing to do to go ahead and do that for him? Because as a parent, you want your kids to do better than you. Then you want to put them in a position to win. And so literally, it was like a consuming thought of mine. I'm like, okay, all right. And I think if you guys are watching this today, when it comes to tackling your fears, Ask yourself this question: how could I do it? And when you ask yourself that question, I believe it's amazing the answers that you come up with. I mean, I thought of everything. I thought of everything. Like if he goes to this one school and the investment that's going to be for that school, I'm like, well, would I sell my home for it? I'd sell my home for it. I had that visualization, that part of that dream this morning. I love my home, but would I sell it? Yeah, absolutely, I would. Because I think the fear, you can overcome them, but I think sometimes you got to use the fear to motivate you and inspire you to change. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think too is like we think about all those things, like the unknowns and like the question marks and all that. And at the same time, like we just have to do the work today to even have to worry about that later. Like if we're not going to do the work, then that's not even a possibility to have to sit and think about. Like, why are we stressing ourselves out about the thought of different things if we're not even willing to do the work today to
Right.
just make today better for us?
That's really well said. Because it's in like, especially I think too, is when we start futurizing, right? Things like, oh, this down the road, this down the road. Okay, well, that's great, but what are you doing today to prepare yourself for the future? I'm listening to one of my favorite books by John Wooden. If you guys don't know who he is, he was the coach of the UCLA Bruins, who won 13 or 12 national championships. And he goes, I like winning. He goes, I love to win, but I don't have control over it. I really don't have control over winning or losing. But what I do have the control over is the preparation for it. Doing the work. He said that the game he felt was a reflection of how he prepared his players during practice. And I'm like, it's so true. I believe that as a coach, I coach volleyball, that I don't call timeouts. I'm known as the coach that's there's no TO in Tony, and it frustrates some people. But I'm like, listen, they're gonna figure out now, folks. I do call timeouts eventually. I'm not anti timeout, but I don't know. I mean, I think Daniil, just as a side note, when you started to experience that, because it was interesting. John Wooden was talking about his wife and how like she was at all his games, and like how like such an important piece of their championships. Um, his wife was actually involved in it. Like he'd look into the stands and he'd look over at her and he's like, okay, all's gonna be good. And I do that with you. I don't know if you know that or not, Danielle. I'll sometimes find you in the stands when I'm getting a little like, oh, I look at you. I'm like, all right, everything's gonna be okay. Her and her amazing smile. Um, I don't know where I was going with that point. I was going with somewhere with that point. Where was I going with that point? That's the nice thing about having these organic conversations. At the end of the day, there are fears that are going to hold you back. And I think you just got to face those fears because they're going to be scary as hell. Some of them are going to be scarier in your mind than they are in reality. It's sort of like when you watch those previews for movies, like The Exorcist is coming out in October. Like, I wanted to close my eyes for that, but it, I don't think it's going to be as scary as it actually is. It might be. I might want to hide, but as we finish up here, Danielle, what would you say is some final thoughts when we talk about fears that hold you back from finishing what you start?
Well, I think just, what focusing on just your day that's in front of you, like not worrying about and taking into buying into the thoughts of the scary thoughts of what's on the other side in the future, what's going to happen. I think when you can just focus on today and what you can control today and doing the work that you want to do towards your goal, that's going to eliminate a lot of the fear that you have within you.
Well said. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this today, to go ahead and write down this phrase. And I'll say this to myself every so often when I'm getting a little bit worked up. I'll say, I am capable and everything is figure outable. And sometimes it eases my mind. Not all the time, but it helps. So if it helps you, I'm all game about it. Hey, again, if you found value in today's conversation, please do share this. Comment, like it. It helps the algorithm, I guess. So we're on YouTube, Rare Leaders, Facebook private group, as well on Twitter. I'm Tony Jalen with
Danielle Jalen.
Go out and be a rare leader, onward and upwards.